Hi, and welcome to another edition of Ruins of Empire with your host, Rafael Piñero. This is going to be the last Dragon Age 2 video for some time. We spent the last month or so talking about Dragon Age 2 and the lessons we could extracted from its less than sterling presentation. However, I also believe, like I stated in the first video, that there were a lot of things you could learn from the game, and also that the game had a lot of possibilities. And in this video, we're going to talk about what could have been. I have three scenarios that cover the possibilities of the game, and I'll start with the most ambitious one. The idea that Dragon Age 2 could have been a fantasy criminal sandbox, a la GTA or Saints Row, except that it would have been set up in the world of Thetis, which is the world of Dragon Age. It's going to take some explaining to see how this would fit there. Like I said, this is a very complex and ambitious idea. Let's start with the beginning. Most criminal sandbox games are usually set in a city with a character that starts from nothing and then builds up a criminal empire along the way. And if you look at Dragon Age 2, it is kind of starts that way. You are escaping from loitering. You have nothing to your name. You're somebody who is also, like many criminals in games like Vice City and Saints Row, you are an outsider. In fact, you are inherently a criminal because either you or a member of your family is an apostate, which are people who are mages outside of the Circle of Magi and therefore outside of the control of the Chantry. And either you are dragged into the Circle or you're executed by the Templars. So certainly you are already a criminal or are in party with criminals. You escape loitering and go to City of Kirkwall. And the first decision you have to make is which group do you ally yourself with? And usually in the criminal sandbox, not only is it set up in a city, and most of the action in Dragon Age 2 is in the City of Kirkwall, and also a city that tends to be very ridden with criminals and decaying and full of all manner of contradictions and hypocrites and just a broken society, right? And one of the reasons, a lot of things that the criminal sandbox has, and the successful ones, is that they sort of both satirize and criticize modern society by comparing it to this fictional society that serves as a mirror to modern society. Again, you go back to GTA, Grand Theft Auto, Liberty City is many ways a Hollywood version of, it's a Hollywood version of New York City. Vice City, Miami. Los Santos in San Andreas is LA, right? And they mock and satirize and criticize the way we live in the modern city and modern society of the time the game is made, of course. And in many ways, you can say that Kirkwall is a reflection of the so-called hub town or fantasy city that's very common. And it could, or at least it could have been, right? But it is inherently corrupt. Everybody from, lowly criminals like the Carta and the Courtier, cutthroats and will kill everybody, right? Or anything just for a couple of coppers, all the way to the nobility, and all of that. And so it would have been a perfect scenario to do that. And I think that's what they were aiming for. And again, you have two groups to choose from. You have a group of smugglers or a group of mercenaries. Now, neither group, especially smugglers, are clearly criminals, but mercenaries were also known for doing underhanded work. Especially in Kirkwall, they're often basically thugs for merchants and noblemen, right? Unlike the adventurer in a classical Dungeons and Dragons game, where usually someone who nobly goes and defeats dragons and slays goblins, in Kirkwall, the mercenary is just somebody who just, thumps people over the head with a mallet or cuts them in half with a sword, because that's what their employers want to do. They do the dirty work. So right there, you have these two choices. Now, had not the game gone into a time skip, it would have been cool to see a series of missions that had you work for and eventually rise in the ranks of one of these two organizations, right? And it will also set the tempo and the of the game. Are you somebody who prefers direct action and therefore join the mercenaries, or somebody who likes to operate from the behind the scenes in the shadows? And that could be, I mean, very interesting, for example, to have a mage that chooses to be someone who does direct attacks on their enemies, or say a warrior or a fighter who decides they're going to be sneaky, or a rogue that attacks in daylight, a mage that uses poison and stuff like that. I mean, that would have been an interesting choice, and I think that was one of the things that we're aiming for with that original choice. But again, you have the time skip. In my version of events, you don't have the time skip. What happens is you go and work for either the mercenaries or the smuggler ring, and as you go along, do quests for them, etc., in and around the city, the same locations you have originally, probably with a couple of more locations, for more variety's sake, you establish your bona fides, you establish control of the group. You may end up taking over the mercenaries, or becoming a partner in the smuggling business, if you will. And along the way, you start meeting different people. For example, as a smuggler, you probably meet Isabella because she has contacts with smugglers. She's a pirate, right? As a mercenary, you might have come across a Fenris who's looking, somebody who has escaped from slaves and is looking to sell his services, right? He's a sellsword. Or maybe you may have been hired to hunt down Fenris, only to realize that he's the victim and not the criminal that you've been told to. And if you look at the original quest, in fact, the original quest when you meet Fenris, for example, would make more sense if you were in fact one of the mercenaries hired to take him in, right? And then you get betrayed by the slavers. Or you could just capture Fenris and send them off and never recruit them. I mean, that could have been a choice, right? And again, those choices would have decided the makeup of your party, and the nature of your relationship with your party members and your main character, and would start dictating how your hawk would approach the challenges before them. Which is also very interesting. Remember, like I mentioned in the last episode, the premise of the game is Hawk's rise to power. So taking control or becoming a leading figure in one of these two groups also makes him a leading figure in the sort of seedy underground of Kirkwall, right? And once you achieve that goal, then you're approached by Varric, of course, who's not only a rogue himself, but also someone who has connections with the Merchant Guild and is looking for maybe looking for guards for the expedition he's going to throw in. He might be looking to both buy, certain kind of materials, or maybe able to sell off stuff that normally couldn't be sold in the regular markets in Kirkwall. And that's therefore he might need smugglers, and stuff like that. You might have, for example, Anders come in. And here, I think, one of the missed opportunities was that in the game, and I'm going to discuss this further on in other scenarios, the game has a tendency to choose the magical over the mundane when an explanation of people's behavior comes up. There's always a chance that a demon did it, or red lyrium did it, an idol, or just exposure to some kind of magic and stuff like that. You can always, as a character, sort of choose and say, no, the person really was broken from the get-go. But that doesn't tend to be the case. The tendency is that there's always a magical way out, or always a magical excuse. In a more criminal, sort of down-to-earth approach to this, the tendency would be to have the situation being more mundane. So the first part of the game would have ended with you going into the expedition, perhaps having Anders join you, and not be a completely different Anders from Awakening, but in fact being a grown-up Anders, right? Anders would have learned to not only live for himself, but also as a Grey Warden, learn to help others. And perhaps he is here because he's also heard about the ancient Thaig, and he's the only member of the Grey Wardens in Kirkwall. He probably would have voluntarily gone to Kirkwall because there were no other Grey Wardens, but he would have maintained the facade of being a warden to protect himself from Templars and others, right? It's like, you're an apostate. I'm also a Grey Warden. And along the way, of course, he would have gotten interested in working with the mages because he acquired a sense of obligation to others, right? That there were bigger things than himself in fighting alongside the Grey Wardens, and learn about sacrifice and heroism and honor. So there was no need to have, the spirit of justice, or just simply justice, turning to vengeance, and in the process sort of mutate Anders, right, and become a completely different character. I don't know why they did that. Some people might find that compelling. I'm not one of them. I already said that. And you start recruiting people, right? Along the way also might be a good time to, say, position different characters, like your family members. Having your family members just die, here's when you start positioning your brother and your sister and even your mother, vis-a-vis other people, right? Do you have your brother, say, join the city guard alongside Aveline? Do you help Aveline become city guard captain, or do you convince her to stay with you as a sort of personal bodyguard, right? Again, that would have given the player character a little more control, not only, again, the makeup of the party, but also guide the party members into what they're doing, which meant that it will also justify the reason why Hawk is the one unifying aspect of the party all across the game. Instead of being just, again, going back to the video about James Bonding and being Hawk sexual, it would be because of loyalty, the way of the things that Hawk has done for them, the way Hawk has influenced their lives and given them jobs and stuff like that. So at this point, Hawk is not necessarily a noble. They will end up as a noble, right? Because now they have money and position, and they have entreaty that the Viscount said, hey, I'm a person of power and wealth, and I used to be an ML as well, and we had a title here, so how about giving us a title back? So that section ends up with the hunting down of Varric's brother, and again, there should have been a choice focusing on the mundane, the fact that, Varric's brother, Bartrand, was more of a bastard than anything else, rather than, the layering item made him do this or that, and there shouldn't have been any time skips, right? If there were any time skips, there should have been before the expedition and after the expedition. The time it took them to get to the places in the Deep Roads that we're searching for and escaping the Deep Roads. Those smaller time skips kind of make sense, right? But the year-long time skip with the mercenaries or the other group, where you supposedly earn your way into the city but end up with little or no cash on your own, and you have to go on into expedition just to get some money, it doesn't really make sense. It also would have fixed a problem I think that Dragon Age 2 has, and to a certain extent even Inquisition has, is that in Origins, it was kind of tough to get gold pieces. A sovereign worth a lot of money. But in Dragon Age 2, you're swimming in sovereigns. You're swimming in gold. Which was another criticism, I think, that the original game had, and this game would have continued, of the sort of the very overinflated economy of most fantasy worlds, fantasy games, specifically those based on Dungeons and Dragons, where everything is gold and platinum, and heroes are walking around with bags full of opals and diamonds and rubies and that kind of thing. But and in fact, because this is a criminal sandbox type situation, the money would be very important, right? As you are also shaping the characters and who gets to join you, and you come at the end of the first section after you dealt with Bartrand, that's when you move into the second part of the game. Now you're someone who is established in the Society of Kirkwall. You have a title, or you're looking for a title. Maybe you don't have a title yet. Maybe having the title was too early. Instead, you are somebody who has wealth and taste, but no title. Here, I think an opportunity was missed in having a sort of a mid town, right? The city has low town, has high town, but it has no mid town, no middle class, no merchants quarter, right? To speak of. Low town, there's a lot of merchants, and there's merchants in different places, but there's no real, merchants area. There's no place where you can see the guild and visit the guild and that sort of thing. And that would, they imply that most of that stuff is in high town, of course, but it would have been good to have that middle area. So you move away from the hovel, living with your uncle, you move into your own home, right? Not yet Hawk Amel nobility, because you're not champion yet, but you're getting there. Now you're getting respectability. And the Viscount starts hearing about you and calls you in and starts doing some work under the table, right? Nothing too, open, of course, because you're not yet someone who's fully established in society, but somebody who has money, somebody who has influence. Perhaps you already have an entire company of guards behind you because you taken over the mercenary company. You defeated or exiled or dealt with the past leader, and now you're the leader. Maybe you position your brother as the leader of the company while you do other things, right? Or maybe you start positioning him to go and join the Templars, right? And try to get a good in with the Templars, right? And you're doing that kind of thing. Maybe you try to send your sister to the circle, or have your sister marry a nobleman or another rich merchant and stuff like that. And get some protection. Money protects as well as position, right? If we're going through that situation, it would be harder for the Templars to go after your sister if she's married to a rich nobleman, right? Of course, keeping the fact that she's a mage secret might be a problem, but if Hawk can walk around the city being a mage, for example, because they're a champion of Kirkwall, even before, because they just have a lot of money influence, then why not the sister, right? Or you're someone who can get very specific things, that otherwise would be too costly or very rare because you're a smuggler, right? And here in the second part of the game, you start having more confrontations with the courtier, the carta, now you're a bigger fish and you're attracting a lot of attention. Here you start investing in things like buying businesses, those businesses where some of the people, like the elf in the warrens below the city, the lady merchant in Lowtown. How about having a mechanic that you invest in these businesses? You actually buy into the business and you get a percentage, just like you buy into the mine at this point. And buying into the mine means that you start getting resources, not only money, but also workers and stuff like that. You start helping your fellow Fereldans and getting also them on your side. You become an advocate of your fellow Fereldans who are stuck in Kirkwall, just like you are, and you start again maneuvering people. And here, for example, the mechanic of being a friend or a rival would have been a great mechanic. I never understood it as a mechanic dealing with just party members, especially when you could still retain a rival and have a romance with a rival, or why a rival would stick around. But in the criminal sandbox situation, now it makes sense, because one of the big problems that a lot of games, in fact, I've never met a game that's been able to do factions well. Either factions have no connection one with each other, so you can get 200 points with one faction and be at 5 points with another, and it doesn't matter, right? It doesn't have your reputation with one faction rarely has an impact on other factions, even if the factions are competing factions. On the other hand, you do have a situation where there's competition or clashes between factions, but either you can't resolve those differences, so you can't bring factions together, or the conflicts follow that sort of game designer logic of that the player just cannot fathom, and the only way to navigate it, you have to go meta. You got to go and read a walkthrough or get a guide or something just to navigate your way through the system. So I never seen factions in a game done particularly well, right? Or a faction that you're working on becomes hostile for whatever reason, or disappears all of a sudden for reasons that you can't fathom. But if you treat the characters in your party as representatives of the factions, as the faces and voices of each faction that you encounter, then that would make for actually a very good faction system. For example, again, we mentioned that Varric is a member of the Merchant Guild and has connections with the underground, has agents and stuff like that. Keeping Varric happy and on your side gives you a good chance of keeping the people that he deals with on your side, right? Having a party member as the captain of the guard, as Aveline becomes, means that you could eventually have the guard on your pocket, or at least on your side, right? Depending on how you deal with her. Having Isabella on your side means that you can, for example, give her steer her to be more of a pirate, right? And therefore, say, funnel money for her expeditions to actually get a ship once you dealt with her personal problem, and she gets a ship if you help her to do that, and she goes out and capture ships and becomes a pirate. Or you can make her a privateer, which is something that you should consider because it's a final part of this narrative that I haven't gotten to yet. Maybe you steer Fenris to either become part of your mercenary group, or in case of being a smuggler, if you have a lot of the people that smuggle for you are, say, city elves, maybe just like Sebastian Vale suggested, you suggest that he train other city elves to defend themselves, right? And those are examples. Meryl could be, instead of being someone who is exiled, could be a bit of an ambassador to the city from the Dalish elves. That one is, I know, it's a bit of a stretch, but it could work. I mean, you can make it work. Instead of having the whole thing with the mirror and people just committing suicide because they just commit suicide for reasons unknown, or very little understandable reasons. And each, Sebastian Vale, of course, represents either the Chantry, if you move him to be supportive of the Chantry, you want the Chantry on your side, or you move him to be, go back to Starkhaven and become the leader of Starkhaven. Having a powerful leader, that owes you favors, be the leader of a nearby city-state. Now that is a great advantage. If your ultimate goal is to become the leader of, to rise to the top, to become the leader of the city, right? And of course, along the way, of course, the Arashock is there, and you have to help Isabella deal with the Arashock. One way or the other, you can decide that you have the final confrontation, right? You're the only one. As the city collapses, the Viscount loses his son, and then finds himself unable to deal with the situation. You find a way, either peaceful, you return the book and send Isabella packing, or a violent one, killing the Arashock, and then you become become a noble, right? You're held as a noble, and get the title of the Amels, but also become the champion of Kirkwall, and by becoming the champion of Kirkwall, you become the Viscount of Kirkwall, because there's nobody to hold the position, right? Instead of being blocked by Meredith, you actually become the champion of Kirkwall. And here's where things would have gotten very interesting. And again, something that a lot of games kind of fail to do, right? You kind of, in many games, you have a lot of mechanics. Some games have mechanics to represent the rise of power, and you gain levels and stuff like that. But few games really allow for the transition, if you will, the evolution of the premise from having power, from getting power to having power and having to deal with the consequences of having that power. And that, in fact, should have been the third part of the game. Here, I think a bit of a time skip, a couple of months, maybe a year, could have been allowed. Not 3 years, though. That's too much. But maybe a year, to say, hey, Hawk was settling in and became the new Viscount by popular demand, but news comes that, and here's where things get interesting, that the Konari are going to send a huge expedition to Kirkwall to make an example of Kirkwall. Remember, Isabella had basically the holiest of holy books. Well, there is a philosophy, but still is considered to be a highly praised book, the center of their whole being, in her hands. There was a book that had fallen into the hands of the Orlesians somehow, and now was, it was within their grasp, and yet, Isabella had it, right, or was pursuing it. And thus, and if you kill the Arashock, which is the leader of the Kunari, at least as presented as such, and you, even if you return the book, or you keep the book, right, by virtue of keeping Isabella alive, and the fact that if you kill the Arashock, then there's nobody to return the book, although some other Kunari probably could have returned it, but it wouldn't be the same, of course. That's a strong argument for the Kunari to say, you know what, we're tired of playing nice guys. for all intents and purposes, Kirkwall broke the agreements, the peace agreements between the Lands of Thedas and the Qunari, and then we're gonna punish the Qunari, the Kirkwall, right? And so now Hawk has to deal with the threat of the Qunari. Qunari are coming. Now, here's what could have happened. If Isabella got turned in, then the Qunari don't attack. But Hawk has to deal basically with an open rebellion. The mages are barreling toward rebellion. The Templars are also barreling to destroy the circle one way or the other. And, Hawk has to choose. And if he chooses the mages, then the Templars basically go outside the city and come back with an army and besiege the city. Now that could have been the easier route of the three examples that I'm going to give, except that if you turn in Isabella, and Isabella is seen as a party member, then you take a huge hit with all the factions. In other words, you might necessarily lose anybody in your party, but all that goodwill that you were building up to that point, with many, if not most, of the party members get lost because you sold out a member of your inner circle, right, which was Isabella. You sold her out. And so now the factions that you need to defend the city, say from a Templar attack from without or a mage rebellion from within, are weakened. That's one option. The second option, the other two options are basically variations on the Templar mages, but are all from the fact that Isabella stuck around or Isabella returned, right? In fact, the idea that Isabella sort of disappears and may or may not return, no. Isabella, in this case, always sticks around. She only leaves if you sold her out, right? Here, of course, you retain necessarily the loyalty of most of your party if you haven't lost it yet, right? And depending on the situation and the people that you place in different places, as well as the way you play the game up to this point, then things start to, snowball, right? And here's also one of the interesting things about the dialogue mechanic, which would have been great in a sandbox situation, criminal sandbox situation, in that, depending on how well how you played the heroic aspect or the sarcastic aspect or the bloodthirsty aspect, you already have especially through Varric's stories, a particular, people have a particular view who you are. You are the great champion of Kirkwall, or you are, the lovable rogue that helps the little people, or you're just a bloodthirsty, get out of my way or I'm going to cut you through you kind of guy, right? Or gal. Let's not forget, you can play a female Hawk. And that's the situation. And that, of course, also tends to serve as an added layer to this final situation. In these other scenarios, the Qunari are coming. Now, if, for example, you have Fenris helping you with the elves, you have a militia. But having a city elf militia makes the nobles and the merchants nervous, because most of the city elves serve as nothing more than their servants, right? Very low, basically slave wages, wage slaves, sorry. And that means that's good, but you have to decide, do I want to have Fenris on my side and a strong, city elf militia to back me up on top of, mercenaries or, a fleet of privateers if I convince Isabella to become a privateer for Kirkwall. Privateer and pirates are similar, except that in this case, her depredation specifically targeted at the Qunari would be under the pay of and to the benefit of Kirkwall, and under the writ of law, we call it a letter of marque or marquis of the ruler of Kirkwall, right? So that shores up your sea defenses a little bit, although of course the Qunari do have gunpowder, so that makes it a bit difficult on that side. But you never know. I mean, ships are ships, and they can be used accordingly. Having, if you have your mercenaries and you have, strong city guard in which you're taking money you have and you invested on rebuilding the walls and what was destroyed during the battle with the Arashok, and giving materials to the city guard to have better shields and armor. That makes it better. You have a series of mechanics in which all the money and all the resources that you have had collecting up to this point and can be, just like in Awakening, can be invested to make your city stronger, right? And here also the decision to side with the Templars or the mages comes to the view. If you side with the mages, and depending on if you're a mage or not and how you played the character, you can have stronger defenses. Of course, mages throw around fireballs, they can stun people, they can heal the wounded, and usually the sarcastic or heroic hawk would want those abilities. The bloodthirsty or cutthroat hawk, the red hawk if you will, would say, you know what, I don't care if you have to summon demons, right? Just summon them. I want all the advantages I can get. And they may have to do that, and that's going to give a strength. Of course, siding with the mages means that you may have a situation where the Templars decide, okay, they're going to leave the city and try to besiege the city from the outside. And depending, for example, how you dealt with Sebastian Vale, you can have Sebastian Vale, if you convince Sebastian Vale to be strong with the Chantry, then he does leave with the Templars and does go to Starkhaven and gathers an army alongside the Templars. But if you convince Sebastian to go back to Starkhaven and be a prince, then he doesn't side with the Templars because, he wants to keep this political alliance with Kirkwall, and he instead raises an army that helps you defend the city. And so it keeps it a little bit in check. The Templars. Now, again, if you choose the Templars over the mages, the Templars are already a well-equipped, well-armed, and well-disciplined force who is loyal to, up to this point, to the Chantry, right? And so would consider the Qunari to be religious enemies, right? And they already, during the game, the actual game, Meredith sides against the Qunari. She actively fights him and helps you take back the city. So there's that. As did the mages, of course. In fact, you did it with the combination of the two. And therefore, you have a situation where, you can have that strong force, but that also means that because of how Meredith has been acting, and again, the emphasis on the mundane versus the magical. Meredith here would not be under the influence of any red kryptonite, lyrium. She would be, her arguments would be stronger because she is, she might be a bit of a zealot, but she is in her right mind. She's not just magically induced by something outside of her control that amplifies her paranoia and her fears and what have you. So there's a good chance that the player might say, well, Meredith, a big strong-willed, but hey, she's the Knight Commander. She's working with the Chantry. She has a point. These people have consistently, use blood magic and summon demons. Especially if you're a mercenary warrior or rogue or fighter hawk, it's like, you know what, I don't have a problem with this. I need the Templars on my side. It makes sense, right? And then of course a Chantry Sebastian could raise forces for you and help you. Or a princely Sebastian could also help you as well. And of course, you have Varric being your eyes and ears. You have the Dalish could be recruited just like they were recruited in Origins, but in this case to be scouts outside of the city and skirmishers, to harass if the Qunari decide, or the Templars come by landward side, that sort of thing. It's all these Anders. If you side with the mages, of course, you would be siding against Anders. When Anders decides, you know what, the mages are right, and I'm going to fight alongside with them. Again, if you have if your brother, if your sister also went with the circle mages, you might have a situation that you have to fight your sister, right? And that would have been great drama, not drama in all capital letters, but empty, kind of soap opera for the drama, with quotation marks and all caps. No, actual drama where you have to decide, do I fight my sister or do I side with her? And if I fight against her, I have to kill her, right? Or maybe I don't have to kill her. I convince her, depending on, again, you're standing with her. She's a rival, she's a friend, right? Whether or not she will go neutral. Say, you know what? I'm not going to fight you because we're family, but also not gonna cooperate, right? As well. And the same thing with your brother. If he joined the city guard or was a member of your of the mercenaries, that's not a bit of a problem. But if you say joined the Templars because you push him in that direction, or maybe because he was a rival to you, instead of dying or becoming a Grey Warden, he becomes a Templar. Then again, you have a situation: do I kill my brother? Do I, try to convince him to stay out of the way? Can I convince him to join me in the last battle, etc.? And in this battle, for example, you side with the Templars. The mages decide, you know what? We have nothing to lose. Well, to the purpose is we lost. The ruler of the city is going to side against us. They're going to dissolve, the circle. They're going to destroy us. They're going to kill us all. So they go crazy with blood magic and kind of like what happens in the end of the game. But in that fight is, instead of being just a crazy fight and it just gets decided in this last battle where you have to basically kill everyone. You have to fight mages and you have to fight Templars. You only fight one faction or the other. And you have one backing you up and the other one being against you. On top of course, the Kunari. If, for example, you sold Fenris. Fenris, I didn't like the character. Had some good abilities, and some ideas behind it, but I wasn't very sympathetic to the character overall. Although I kind of warmed up to him later on in the game, once he got rid of the whole, slavery thing. If, for example, you sell Fenris to his former master, right? Yes, the nobles are more likely to give you coin and support, but it also means that the city elves are more likely to, say, not only not fight alongside you, but side with the Kunari, because the Kunari treat them more or less like equals, right? Under the Qun, everybody's a Kunari, including elves, right? And so, just like it happened with the original uprising with the Arishok, that a lot of elves sided with them, you could have even more elves siding with them as well. And stuff like that. And then, of course, at the end of that, if you succeed, you literally rise to power, you're the Viscount, and the game ends. And the good thing about all this is not only is it a very intriguing situation that so far I don't know of any criminal sandbox with a strong fantasy element. Or should I say fantasy criminal sandbox. I have never played it, I never heard about it. If you heard about it, please put it in the comments below, because I like to see the game and play it. That'll be interesting. I haven't seen it. And so I think this would have been an excellent opportunity. And also, structuring the game around that concept of rise to power would actually have made the three disparate and different plots really mesh together, right? Because the first one is you're getting your basic resources. The second part is about establishing yourself and dealing with the big stumbling block against your rise to power, which is the Array Shock. And finally, the third part, what you do once you have that power, right? And it would have gone again to a place that many games, fantasy otherwise, don't go, which is what happens after you have all this power. Yes, you conquer the city. What now? And that game could have solved it. And I think the game was trying to do that. But again, because of the original shortened development, it just didn't. In fact, I have a theory that, in fact, this game originally probably was a fantasy game, but wasn't meant to be a Dragon Age game. Probably was pitched by some studio owned by EA, but they didn't even have a name. And said, oh yeah, we want to do a crime sandbox game, but in a fantasy milieu. And what the people upstairs in the EA in Seattle heard was like, oh, you're making a fantasy game. Oh, so therefore you're making a Dragon Age game. Okay, here's some money. Here's 18 months of development. Go and do the thing. And you're like, but that's not what we were. Okay, fine, whatever, And they slapped the name of BioWare on the side of the building wherever the people were working, and now they were BioWare wherever, east, west, north, south, hell, whatever, limbo, and worked on the game, and we got what we got. But I think that's the most ambitious format. But I think it would have been great. It would have been different, and people like me, I think, would have criticized it for not being another Origins, or being a direct sequel from Origins. But I think if they had managed to pull it off, it would have been a very interesting take and a very audacious take on fantasy role-playing games and introducing other mechanics into it. Of course, it would have required a more open city, right? Instead of being just these different little clumps here and there. You have to go one loading to another. You have to be a bigger city and more that could be navigated better. They have a lot of more places you can go into, like shops and stores and bars and stuff like that. So they give a sense of depth, right? But I think it could have been a good game, and I hope that somebody is thinking about making a fantasy crime sandbox game. Why not, right? That would have been great. But this game wasn't it. The second one, second format I think they could have gone with is a more simpler one. And this is more following on the take about the DLC and, the nickel and diming and Project $10. Instead, if what EA wanted was simply to fill in the space between Origins and whatever main BioWare developers decided was going to be the true sequel of the series, then instead they should have gone what I call the Telltale route. They should have made an episodic format. It would have been, Dragon Age: The Tales of Hawk, if you will, right? And Hawk and the Kunari assassin, the Mark of the Assassin, Hawk and the Blood Legacy or the Family Legacy of the Grey Warden Prison. Another DLC. I mean, Hawk and the Dalish of Sudamount. Hawk and the Pirate Queen of the American Sea, right? Hawk and the Great Expedition to the Deep Roads. Each one of the different stories or set of stories or quests would have been a self-contained a little adventure. Kind of like reminding you of Neverwinter Nights. And in fact, it would have been great if it would have been bundled with some kind of engine, that would allow you to create your own adventures. And that would have kept, interest in Dragon Age going until such time as they figured out. And of course, it would have required two things. First of all, instead of being Cassandra Pendergast, she interrogating Varric in the empty mansion, Hawk Mansion, it should have been, say, Varric writing and or telling stories in the Hangman, right? And people come and go, in the first, it could be Liliana. It's like, I heard that Hawk was a mage. Is Hawk a mage? Well, yes, or he had a mage family. What did Hawk do when the mages got rowdy in Kirkwall? Oh, well, Hawk did this and that, right? And he tells the story of that. And maybe you have Anders come in as a Grey Warden. It's like, yeah, I heard that there's a prison that had to do with Grey Wardens, and Hawk's family had something to do with that. Can you tell me the story about that? Oh, it's like Hawk against, the ancient Grey Warden prison and stuff like that. Each one would be self-contained. Now, the price point, especially of the first installment, should have been much lower, between $20 or $30. It would have the new engine, right? It would also have the game builder, the module builder, just like Neverwinter Nights, and it will have a shorter campaign. And then on top of that, you at a price point between, say, $5 to $20, you would add new episodes. But each one will be self-contained. Again, it would be, like I talked about in the first video, Dragon Age, a soft sequel. You'll have the same characters, not the ones in the original, although, again, you could have, just like in Dragon Age 2, a lot of cameos. People come and go and show up and ask Varric for stories. It would keep the themes of Dragon Age going, right? It could be one of the adventures. Eventually, it could be Hawk and the Witch of the Wilds, right? And that would be a couple of hours, between 3 to 5 hours, 10 at the most, each episode, and you play them. And it's all, if the quality is good, and you could experiment with different mechanics in different episodes, like stealth mechanics in one thing, and more broader light mechanics or more tactical mechanics and that sort of thing. And again, basically a collection of DLC, right? And you could milk the audience for all the money they were willing to give you, but you would avoid, of course, selling power, because each chapter would have new magical items and new abilities and stuff like that. And you could explore, each one would have a much smaller cast. For example, you would always have, of course, Varric, storyteller, and the Hawk family, Hawk and their siblings as a core group. And you can switch out some of those people for Aveline, helping Aveline in the city guard, Hard and Hound and Hightown. In fact, it could have been, in fact, it would have been perfect to sort of bring Varric's stories to life. story of Heart in Hightown and other stories, with Hawk being at the center of the story. But you wouldn't have to worry about creating sort of a grand, all-encompassing story arc that covers an entire game. You wouldn't have to worry about being a direct sequel from the past or a complete setup for the future, right? It's just stuff that happens. And you can throw in the background, the Templar Mages thing and stuff like that. But you wouldn't have to worry about that. And trust me, if done well, you could easily end up charging well over $200 for all of this. If you make 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 episodes, right, at $10 to $20 each, you could make as much money as possible. And also, the development time for each one will be much shorter, right? You will be reusing so many assets like characters and some locations, like home base, Kirkwall, for example, stuff like that. But you don't have to do a lot of detail outside what you need for each episode. And the popularity of Telltale games shows that you can do that. Again, people like me would have, I wanted a full game. I wanted my 20 plus hours experience, that sort of thing. But I said, are these games fun? Am I being entertained? Are they internally consistent in each episode? Do I like the themes about it? Is the price point of any one episode good enough that I don't feel cheated, right? Or inundated with, extras that I don't need to pay for that will break the curve, stuff like that. If that's the case, I think I would have said, you know what? Maybe not my cup of tea perhaps, but I would probably give it a try, and I wouldn't have been so harsh about it. The last option is based on Dragon Age Inquisition, and I will say this once, and I'll repeat it a couple more times. Spoilers for Dragon Age Inquisition. I say again, spoilers for Dragon Age Inquisition. If you haven't reached that part in the game, or you haven't played Inquisition yet, these are spoilers. Okay? Now, if you're going to insist on making a so-called hard sequel, a direct sequel, part of a meta plot, a meta or mythic arc, right, that ties 2 or more games together, then the focus should have been on Corypheus. It should have been on the Grey Wardens and the connection between Hawk and the Grey Wardens. Not the Templars, not the Mages, not the Arashok, not Kirkwall. Kirkwall only is in a place that is being corrupted due to Corypheus' presence in many ways, right? The Red Lyrium, the corruption, that sort of thing. I mean, that's the other side of magic versus mundane. Make all the things in Kirkwall being influenced by magic. In subtle ways, but certainly corrupted by magic, right? And the dark side of magic. If you really want to explore that side of it, then you can have Kirkwall as a city that's being slowly but inevitably corrupted, all the way back to the initial corruption of the Tevinter mages, both in assaulting the Fade and the city of the Maker, but also experimenting with all kinds of things, and maybe the ancient dwarves as well, experimenting with lyrium and what have you. You might have thrown in the fact that the Red Lyrium and Corypheus and the Grey Wardens and the Black and the Darkspawn are all connected, right? In that case, the cast would be smaller, although you would have a very interesting reasons to say bringing Fenris. Why would we Fenris? Fenris knows about the Tevinters. He knows about the way they act. Maybe he has information about Tevinters that you need to explore these ruins. Varric, of course, has connections and information about the Deep Roads, and he's a dwarf, and maybe the resources. Anders, of course, might be continuing to investigate the after effects of what happened in Awakening, especially with the Architect. And is it possible to cure, the Darkspawn, right? Which is a spoiler for Dragon Age Origin DLC Awakening. What is the nature of this Darkspawn, prison, right? This and what really happens to Grey Wardens when the taint finally takes them and stuff like that. Some of that gets explored, but it gets explored in the DLC. And at the end of the day, the ending of the DLC is very it's not very it doesn't. Okay, how do I put it? I'm mangling the word here. The end is not one that is satisfactory. That's the word I was looking for. At least not to my taste, because in the end you think you defeat Corypheus, which is this ancient darkspawn, but in fact escape and serve as a setup to being the main villain of Dragon Age Inquisition, the Elder One, right? The original, or one of the original darkspawn, right? And that's a problem, and it would probably remain a problem here, but at least the game would have been basically a strict sequel, right? You would have a connection with the Wardens of the first game. You would continue some of the themes there, specifically the idea of the origins of magic, the Tevinters, the dwarves, the Lyrium, the Darkspawn, the Fate, and all of that. But now in the person of Hawke and their family, right? And their effects on Kirkwall and their effects on, Meryl, for example, somebody you can bring in because she knows about elven magics and she knows about blood magic. Some of the characters like Isabella wouldn't have fit. It's like, why do you have this pirate chick with us? It was like, I don't know, she just likes you, right? It would have been, and it would have avoided a lot of the James Bonding as well, I suppose. But, it probably would have been a shorter game. It would have been about 10 hours at most. But as filler between, Origins and Inquisition, it could have worked. I think it still would have been a inferior product, but not necessarily as flawed as I talked about in the last month or so. So that's a third thing. And so those are the possibilities. Those are the scenarios that would make for a very much different game. And overall, a better game. Not perhaps better than Origins or Inquisition, but certainly one game that would have been worthy of the name Dragon Age, right? And would it fit in the trilogy and within the space of the IP. So what are the final lessons to be extracted from all of this? Well, the first lesson, of course, is do not rush development. I think most people will agree, even people who are diehard fans of this game, that the game suffered because it was thrown out there too quickly, right? And therefore, not enough probably time and money was given to fully develop the game. You feel that there are missing parts there. The second lesson, I think, is don't be afraid to experiment. Yes, the few things that this game has are because they broke with the model of Dragon Age Origins. They integrated some lessons from Mass Effect, such as the dialogue system and stuff like that, and they were not bad, and had they done more of that, I think you would have a very interesting game. Also, talk about innovation and talking about the scenarios I presented, it would have been interesting if the developers were giving time to sort of step back and say, you know what, let's not just make a hard trilogy, a close meta arc, etc. And said, you know what, we have this great world, the world of Dragon Age, Thedas, with all this stuff. We can do whatever we want in this world. We can make a fantasy crime sandbox. We can make an episodic story, right? We can make almost anything. Let's do that, right? We can explore different aspects of this story, like the Kunari, like the relationship with Tevinter and the rest of Thedas, and stuff like that, like the ancient, Darkspawn and all of that. You can really expose. In fact, my favorite DLC, in fact, my favorite part of the game is a DLC, which is one of the reasons why the game kind of suffers from it, in my opinion, because that should have been part of the game, is, Mask of the Assassin, and what you learn about the Kunari and other stuff there. Emphasize those things. Other lesson is, of course, avoid James Bonding. Avoid creating an entire cast just to fulfill the sexual fantasies of the player. Give the characters a little more depth, right? Because otherwise, it's a very thin reed in which you hang your entire game. In fact, it's a reed at all means that it's already a very weak foundation, and or perch, as the case may be. Finally, I think it's more of an observation. Looking at Dragon Age Inquisition, I see that many of the lessons were in fact learned, except the fact that the designers were felt compelled to justify retroactively the weaknesses, the failures of Dragon Age 2 in Inquisition. So they constantly refer to, oh yeah, this happened because of this, and this happened because of that. And sometimes it's better off to be left alone, right? If that's the way the phrase goes. And I apologize if it isn't. But overall, I think they did learn the lesson. They created a more balanced party. They didn't kill off characters just for the drama. They created a wider, a more open space. And in fact, they introduced mechanics that really show your rise to power and gave the character power over the game, and refocus on the idea that first and foremost, gameplay is the thing. It's more as a more sandbox element. I mean, it's an overall better game. Combat is faster. More varied, except for the rifts. The quests are more interesting and are better tied to the main storyline. It has a consistent storyline as well as a consistent plot. It explores more of the setting. I mean, overall, it is a superior game than Dragon Age 2, and I would say in some cases superior to Origins, although nearly a decade between them, and the fact that you had a new generation of consoles come out between the original and Inquisition means that they're very different games as well, right? So my suggestion, not only in Dragon Age 2, but also Mass Effect, as these two big IP, is that to the developers of BioWare, if they ever listen to this, is, you know what? Time for a reboot. Time to just take the full measure of the settings that you have, this place, this world that you have, worlds and galaxies and universes that you created, and use them fully, right? As opposed to have them be nickel dime or just try to do more of the same, right? So that's probably the final lesson. And to my satisfaction, I think the developers in BioWare actually learned those lessons, which is, I think, it's a great note to end with. So that is all for now. I hope that you, of course, subscribe and comment below, and you enjoyed the series, and there will be other series, other shows discussing different aspects of FPS and stuff like that in the future. Although probably there'll be just one episode with one game as opposed to having 4 or 5 of a single game. But, you know, we'll see what happens. So, thank you for watching, and I'll see you when I see you. Good night.